In the summer of 1984, the quiet oak-shaded grounds of the Carter estate in rural Alabama buzzed with preparations for a wedding that promised joy, but delivered only whispers. Elizabeth Carter, radiant at 25, moved through the sprawling mansion, her laughter delicate yet distant, her gaze occasionally troubled. It was a warm night, heavy with jasmine and the subtle musk of approaching rain. Lanterns lined the pathways leading from the garden to the family lake, their light gently swaying, casting shifting shadows across the grass. Elizabeth's bridesmaids, each wrapped in silk and excitement, scattered across the estate, their chatter bright and untroubled. Emily Mitchell. Elizabeth's closest childhood friend stood quietly at the veranda's edge, the wind catching her soft curls. She watched Elizabeth closely, her eyes gentle, thoughtful, yet unreadable. Elizabeth's fiancé, William Reynolds, a soft-spoken, dutiful man, shadowed by his domineering mother Vivian, lingered anxiously near the garden entrance. Vivian stood stiffly nearby, her pale face stark against her dark gown. Her eyes narrowed as she glanced repeatedly toward Elizabeth with barely veiled disdain. As twilight thickened, maid-of-honor Sarah Bennett approached Elizabeth from the veranda, her stride, tense voice edged with urgency. Guests later recalled Sarah gripping Elizabeth's arm, her words spilling forth in rapid anger, accusations veiled but unmistakable. Sarah's eyes glistened fiercely in the lantern's glow, betraying jealousy and pain. Emily stepped softly behind a pillar unnoticed, observing the heated exchange. Elizabeth's face paled beneath Sarah's bitter whispers. She shook her head resolutely, pulling away, leaving Sarah trembling, fists clenched at her side. Elizabeth, clearly unsettled, wandered toward the lake, the water shimmering black under moonlight. Emily silently tracked her movements, expression calm, yet watchful. As Elizabeth paused briefly at the shore, breathing deeply as if steadying herself against some inner turmoil. A distant splash echoed faintly across the grounds. No one turned toward it, just another ordinary sound swallowed by the night. Yet by morning, Elizabeth Carter was gone, vanished without a trace. The only remnant of her presence was the faint perfume of jasmine lingering on the path to the lake, and Emily's quiet assertion that she'd seen Elizabeth walking alone beneath the moonlit sky. Only much later would anyone question why Emily had not called out, why she had remained a silent observer, her eyes catching every detail as Elizabeth disappeared into the shadows of the Carter estate, leaving behind nothing but echoes beneath moonlight. By dawn, panic had seized the Carter estate. Elizabeth Carter's bed lay untouched, her wedding gown hanging in silent accusation. Police officers walked carefully through the gardens, their boots pressing softly into grass damp from dew, their murmurs carrying a quiet intensity. Theo Ellis, the estate gardener, stood quietly by the greenhouse, watching the chaos unfold with careful eyes. For decades, Theo had tended these grounds, each flower bed familiar beneath his worn fingers, each tree rooted deeply into his memories. Yet today, the beauty of this place felt corrupted, overshadowed by something dark lingering just beneath the surface. Detective Marcus Reed, a man known locally for his meticulous, almost obsessive methods, approached Theo, notebook, open pen poised. "Did you notice anything unusual last night, Theo?" Marcus asked, his voice calm, measured. Theo paused thoughtfully, leaning against the greenhouse doorframe, the scent of damp soil heavy in the air. It was quiet, too quiet. People were tense. Elizabeth seemed troubled, more nervous than happy. He hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly as if recalling a fragment of memory long buried. "What is it?" Marcus pressed gently. Theo's gaze drifted toward the lake, its still surface glittering deceptively peaceful under the morning sun. "Paul Foster, Elizabeth's cousin. He's been around a lot more lately. Always hanging near the lake at odd times, staring into the water as if searching for something." Marcus scribbled quickly, his interest sharpening. "And last night, he was out there again," Theo continued softly. "I saw him through the trees, pacing by the shore, hands in his pockets, face pale, talking to himself maybe, or maybe talking to someone I couldn't see." Theo's voice lowered barely above a whisper, as if afraid his words might awaken something hidden. He always had a way about him, quiet but unsettling. Theo's gaze moved slowly across the gardens, lingering briefly on Emily, who stood quietly with William comforting him, her hand gently on his shoulder. Her posture was relaxed, face composed, eyes downcast, a picture of quiet loyalty amidst tragedy. Yet something subtle caught Theo's attention, a fleeting moment when Emily glanced toward him, her eyes briefly sharp, almost wary before softening again. Marcus, following Theo's gaze, made notes without speaking, absorbing every subtle gesture, every unspoken tension that hung thickly in the air. As Theo returned quietly to his tasks, carefully tending flowers bruised by careless footsteps, he wondered why his thoughts kept returning to Emily. Something about her gentle stillness felt oddly unsettling, as though beneath the calm surface lay hidden depths waiting silently, patiently to be revealed. 3 days passed thick with unanswered questions and whispers that seeped into every corner of the estate. Detective Marcus Reed, guided by fragments of witness accounts, soon found himself in the elegant, faintly perfumed guest room where Sarah Bennett sat quietly, eyes swollen, hands twisting anxiously in her lap. A diary, Elizabeth's diary, lay open before Marcus, pages warped handwriting blurred by moisture, yet unmistakably raw in its revelations. Marcus studied Sarah carefully, his expression neutral yet probing. "Elizabeth's diary has a great deal to say about you," he said quietly, gently tapping the pages. "Jealousy is a dangerous thing. Sometimes it pushes people further than they ever intended." Sarah looked up sharply, eyes wide, her voice thick with distress. "I argued with her, yes, but that was friendship, honest anger. Elizabeth was changing. William, his mother, they smothered her. She forgot who she was." Marcus tilted his head slightly, observing Sarah's flushed face, her trembling fingers. "Was that why you confronted her, to remind her who she was, or perhaps who you wished she had remained?" Sarah's breath caught, gaze falling, cheeks reddening further beneath Marcus's quiet scrutiny. "She had everything," Sarah murmured, voice barely audible. "Beauty, wealth, love, everything. But William, he should have been mine first. Elizabeth knew it. Everyone knew it." Marcus glanced back at the diary, reading aloud, softly, his voice calm and detached. "Sarah keeps looking at William with those hungry eyes, and I can't shake the feeling that something darker simmers beneath our friendship. It's exhausting, constantly guarding myself from her envy." Sarah flinched visibly, eyes brimming. "I would never hurt her," she whispered urgently, desperation lacing her voice. "I admit my jealousy, but it never crossed into hatred. Elizabeth was my best friend. Without her, I had nothing." Marcus regarded her, steadily absorbing every subtle flicker of emotion that played across her face. "Did you follow Elizabeth to the lake that night?" Sarah shook her head violently, eyes imploring belief. "No, I argued with her, then stayed on the veranda, ashamed, angry with myself. I never moved from that spot, I swear it." Outside, Emily passed quietly down the hall, footsteps soft against polished wood. For a moment, Marcus caught sight of her face. Serene movements, gentle posture, impeccably composed, carrying a small basket of flowers. As she passed, her eyes lingered briefly upon the open diary in Marcus's hands, an expression crossing her face so fleetingly subtle that Marcus almost doubted he'd seen it at all. Sarah noticed nothing, her eyes fixed pleadingly on Marcus. But in the silence following Emily's quiet departure, Marcus felt a faint unease stir, a distant echo, suggesting that perhaps envy was not the only dangerous emotion hidden within the tangled threads of friendship. Evening shadows stretched long and thin across the Carter estate as Detective Marcus Reed ascended the grand staircase, pausing briefly to observe the family portraits lining the walls. The faces gazed impassively from their gilded frames, their eyes seeming to harbor secrets Marcus yearned to uncover. He found William Reynolds seated stiffly in the study, the quiet hum of a ceiling fan underscoring the tense silence. William's mother, Vivian, stood near a large window, watching Marcus enter with an air of controlled impatience. Her fingers clasped tightly behind her back nails, digging into her palms, a quiet betrayal of her carefully maintained composure. Marcus acknowledged them both with a respectful nod. "I apologize for the intrusion," he began evenly. "But we found something curious, a torn piece of Elizabeth's diary near the lake. She wrote about you, Mrs. Reynolds." Vivian's expression tightened subtly, eyes narrowing. Elizabeth was sentimental, prone to dramatics. I wouldn't place much value on her ramblings. Marcus maintained his measured, calm voice unwavering. She described feeling suffocated, constantly judged. Vivian's eyes cut like knives, she wrote. She hates losing control. William shifted uneasily, his gaze flickering between Marcus and his mother, tension etched deeply into his face. My mother is strict, William murmured hesitantly. But she loved Elizabeth, wanted what was best for us both. Yet Elizabeth described a confrontation, Marcus continued gently. She mentioned feeling threatened, and we noticed something. Marcus's gaze dropped pointedly to Vivian's carefully manicured hands. Long, deep scratches marred the pale skin of her wrists, still raw beneath her bracelets. Vivian instinctively pulled her sleeves downward, eyes flashing sharply with sudden anger. Gardening accident, she said dismissively, tone brittle. I despised the lake it bred mosquitoes. Elizabeth knew that. Marcus raised an eyebrow, slightly calmly pressing further. Witnesses said they saw you near the lake shortly after Elizabeth vanished. Care to explain? Vivian's posture, stiffened eyes, coldly defiant. I was looking for William. He seemed distraught. I worried he might do something reckless. William looked away quickly, discomfort plain on his face, shame coloring his cheeks. Marcus noticed Vivian's gaze soften imperceptibly as she observed her son, protective, fierce, almost desperate. Outside, the faint scent of gardenias drifted through the open window, carrying with it a soft rustle of fabric. Emily stood silently near the veranda, arranging fresh-cut flowers with practiced calm. For a brief moment, her gaze lifted, meeting Marcus's through the glass. Her expression held quiet sympathy. Yet Marcus felt a subtle, almost unsettling intensity behind those gentle eyes. Turning back to Vivian and William, Marcus concealed his growing uncertainty beneath practiced neutrality. Something here felt wrong, dangerously misplaced. Vivian's anger and William's fragility seemed genuine, yet both somehow incomplete. Meanwhile, beneath Emily's gentle hands, delicate petals trembled quietly, their beauty concealing a truth more complicated and chilling than Marcus could yet fathom. Days stretched into weeks as Marcus Reed sifted through memories, diary fragments, and half-truths. The quiet estate, once so full of laughter, now echoed with muted voices and unanswered questions. Marcus's attention had begun to focus more intently on Paul Foster, whose solitary presence lingered persistently near the lake. Yet something about Emily Mitchell, the quiet bridesmaid, whose calm loyalty seemed unshakable, continued to tug at his thoughts. Late one evening, Marcus found William alone in the drawing room, sitting by a shattered mirror. Jagged shards lay scattered across the polished floor, glittering dangerously beneath the dim lamplight. What happened? Marcus asked softly, surveying the broken glass. William looked up, startled eyes hollow with exhaustion. I lost my temper, he admitted quietly. My mother can be suffocating. I couldn't breathe. He paused, rubbing his temples. Elizabeth was my lifeline. Without her, I'm lost. A gentle creak of floorboards made them both turn. Emily stood quietly in the doorway, carrying a tray of tea, eyes wide with concern. I'm sorry to intrude, she murmured softly. I thought you might need something comforting. Marcus watched Emily closely as she moved gracefully around the shattered mirror, carefully avoiding the broken pieces. Her presence was soothing, her movements delicate yet purposeful. She placed a reassuring hand on William's shoulder, her touch lingering just a fraction longer than necessary. It's going to be all right, Emily whispered softly, voice like a balm. Elizabeth would want you to heal William. Marcus caught the faintest tremble in her voice, a subtle, unsettling note. Miss Mitchell, he interjected gently, did Elizabeth ever confide in you about Vivian or perhaps Paul Foster? Emily straightened slowly, turning her calm gaze toward Marcus. Elizabeth rarely complained openly. Detective, she said evenly, hands clasped gently before her. But Vivian frightened her deeply. And Paul, she paused, eyes shifting briefly downward. Paul seemed obsessed. He watched Elizabeth constantly, like he was waiting for something. Marcus noted her quiet deflection, the careful shifting of suspicion away from herself. Yet beneath her composed surface, a fleeting unease lingered. Marcus followed Emily's gaze downward, catching a subtle glint among the mirror shards, a tiny silver brooch nestled discreetly within the fragments of glass. "Is that yours?" Marcus asked casually, carefully retrieving it. Emily hesitated only a moment, then smiled faintly, reaching to accept the brooch. "Yes, it must have fallen from my dress. Elizabeth gave these brooches to each bridesmaid." Her voice softened imperceptibly. "She was always thoughtful like that." Marcus watched her carefully handing back the brooch, his mind quietly cataloging this seemingly insignificant detail. Emily's fingers tightened briefly around the delicate object, knuckles whitening ever so slightly before relaxing once more into gentle composure. As Marcus left the drawing room, stepping carefully around the broken mirror, he felt an unsettling sensation like stepping too close to the edge of a hidden abyss. Emily's calm face lingered in his mind, serene yet somehow fractured, a quiet reflection distorted by a subtle hidden darkness he was only beginning to see. Autumn rains soaked the grounds of the Carter estate, washing away superficial elegance and revealing the worn edges beneath. In 2009, 25 years after Elizabeth Carter's disappearance, Theo Ellis stood knee-deep in muddy waters at the lake's edge, rain pelting his weathered face as he guided the machinery dragging the lake bottom. His hands, calloused from decades of tending this land, now trembled slightly, not from cold, but from anticipation of uncovering truths long submerged. Suddenly, the machinery jolted sharply, snagging upon something heavy beneath the surface. Theo raised a hand, halting the operation. Silence pressed heavily around them, broken only by the rhythmic patter of rain. Carefully, slowly, Theo waded toward the tangled object being hauled upward, his heart thudding sharply against his ribs. A pale shape emerged, mud-streaked and ghostly in the dim daylight. Theo's breath caught sharply. It was a dress. Unmistakably bridal, twisted and bound with rusted heavy chains. Fabric torn and stained, it hung heavily, dripping muddy water like old tears. Elizabeth's dress. Beside it, tangled in lace, were faded diary pages, ink bleeding but still legible, whispering secrets in Elizabeth's trembling handwriting. Words of rage and envy, betrayal and obsession. Vivian's name appeared repeatedly, sharp with accusations of suffocation. Sarah's envy seethed vividly from lines marred by Elizabeth's anxious scrawl. Paul Foster's name lingered hauntingly in the margins, his obsession darkening every corner of her words. Theo's chest tightened painfully as police approached, cautiously, carefully extracting the dress and fragments of Elizabeth's final words. Marcus Reed, now grayer but no less meticulous, stood beside Theo, face lined with years of unresolved questions. "This was always here," Marcus murmured quietly. "Hidden beneath our feet." Theo nodded, voice barely audible. "Secrets never really disappear," he said softly, gaze locked on the sodden fabric. Something glinted faintly beneath layers of muddy lace. Marcus leaned closer, carefully teasing away fabric until he held a small, ornate brooch, mud-caked, intricate silver filigree unmistakably identical to those worn by Elizabeth's bridesmaids. Marcus turned the brooch over, the expression darkening thoughtfully. Etched delicately on its back was a tiny inscription, faint but clear. "To Emily, forever my friend." Marcus's breath paused, mind spinning backward through memory to Emily's gentle calmness, her quiet, unwavering presence, and the subtle ways she'd guided suspicion elsewhere. Theo watched Marcus's face carefully. "Something wrong?" Marcus shook his head slowly, gripping the brooch tightly. "Not wrong," he murmured, eyes distant, voice thick with unease. "Just unexpected." As the rain intensified, Marcus stood silently, realization dawning slowly, yet inexorably. The chains of this tragedy bound more than Elizabeth's dress. They tied together lives, secrets, and quiet betrayals that had remained hidden far too long beneath calm waters. And quietly, from a distant window of the estate, Emily watched the scene unfold, her calm gaze, unwavering eyes betraying nothing but the faintest flicker of cold recognition, as though the past she had tried so carefully to bury had finally inevitably surfaced. Marcus Reed sat alone in the dimly lit study of the Carter estate, the recovered diary fragments arranged carefully across the polished oak desk. The room felt colder now, shadows pressing heavily against him, whispering softly of the secrets they'd guarded for so many years. Outside, the rain persisted, a slow, insistent tapping against windows streaked with condensation. Across from him, William Reynolds stood rigidly, hands clasped tightly, expression proud but worn thin by time and suspicion. Marcus tapped one fragment gently, voice calm and detached. "Elizabeth wrote about your arguments frequently, Mrs. Reynolds. Harsh words, anger, she feared your control." Vivian's eyes narrowed, lips pressing thinly together. "I never pretended to be a gentlewoman, detective." Elizabeth struggled with boundaries. "She resented my influence, but I didn't harm her." Marcus glanced briefly toward another fragment, voice remaining even. "She feared you. Vivian would rather break something than lose control," she wrote. Vivian's shoulders stiffened, jaw tightening subtly beneath his gaze. "Elizabeth misunderstood my intentions," she snapped. "Protecting William isn't a crime. Elizabeth made reckless choices. My son was vulnerable. I had to intervene." Marcus paused, absorbing her defensive posture, the icy precision of her words. He knew rage could twist love into something darker, but Vivian's fury felt oddly transparent, too easily revealed. His instincts stirred, sensing a subtle misdirection, a truth more deeply buried than Vivian's open hostility. "Did you know Paul Foster had become obsessed with Elizabeth?" Marcus asked, suddenly shifting focus. Vivian's gaze faltered briefly, uncertainty flickering across her face. Paul was troubled, quiet, strange. Elizabeth pitied him, but I saw the darkness in him. Marcus watched her carefully, noting how effortlessly suspicion could be shifted. As she spoke, his gaze fell again upon the diary, a line catching his attention, barely legible beneath mud stains, but strikingly clear in meaning. "Even Emily, my truest friend, looks at me now with hidden eyes. Is friendship so fragile?" Marcus's breath caught quietly. Emily's name appeared sparingly, overshadowed by the louder, angrier mentions of Sarah, Vivian, and Paul. Yet here, embedded subtly in doubt, lay a clue, one easy to overlook, but impossible to ignore now. Vivian noticed Marcus's brief distraction, seizing the opportunity to press further. "Look closely at Paul, detective. He loved her desperately, dangerously. Ask Theo. He saw Paul lurking by the lake night after night." Marcus nodded slowly, gathering the fragments carefully. Vivian watched him leave, her gaze triumphant, yet shadowed by something deeper, a fear not fully understood. Marcus felt it too, an unease quietly growing, as though truth itself had splintered, scattering fragments meant to mislead. As Marcus walked down the corridor, rain still beating rhythmically against the windows, Emily passed silently by, carrying fresh linens, face serene, movements graceful. Marcus paused briefly, catching her eyes, clear, gentle, yet momentarily guarded. "Is everything all right?" "Detective," Emily asked softly, voice warm, reassuringly. "Calm." Marcus forced a gentle smile, nodding quietly, his voice betraying nothing. "Of course, Emily. Everything is exactly as it seems." Yet as Emily walked away, her steps soft and steady, Marcus's heart quickened. The truth, he realized, lay not in the loudest words, but in fragments barely whispered, and in eyes that spoke quietly, guardedly, of hidden pain. Marcus's investigation led him once more to Sarah Bennett, whose quiet life had unraveled dramatically over the years. Now living alone in a small, meticulously kept house on the edge of town, Sarah's bitterness had given way to sadness, a silent resignation etched deeply into her features. Rain still tapped lightly against her window as Marcus sat across from her at the worn kitchen table, Elizabeth's diary fragments placed carefully between them. Sarah's eyes clouded with regret as she read Elizabeth's anguished words again, her fingers trembling slightly as she traced familiar handwriting. "I hated myself for feeling that envy," Sarah whispered, voice heavy with sorrow. "But I never wanted her gone. She was my anchor despite it all." Marcus studied her carefully, searching for deception, but finding only the genuine ache of loss. "Yet your argument the night she disappeared was intense enough for people to notice. What did you say to her?" Sarah looked away, tears pooling quietly in her eyes. "I accused her of taking everything from me. William, my place in her life, my pride. But it was never about her. It was about my own failure. I was cruel. I hurt her deeply, and I've lived with that every day since." Marcus leaned forward slightly, voice softening. "Did Elizabeth mention Emily Mitchell to you that night? Did she ever seem afraid of her?" Sarah hesitated briefly, frowning thoughtfully. Elizabeth trusted Emily completely, but that night she said something strange. She mentioned that Emily knew things about her that even she'd forgotten herself. It felt like Emily had always quietly kept score. It confused her. Marcus felt a chill brush gently against his spine, suspicion crystallizing subtly in his thoughts. Emily's quiet presence throughout every conflict, the gentle comfort she offered, always just slightly off-center, always carefully balanced, was slowly revealing itself as something darker, more purposeful. A soft knock at Sarah's door interrupted his thoughts. Marcus turned to see Emily standing quietly on the porch, holding a small, carefully wrapped package, expression gentle, serene as ever. Sarah stiffened slightly, anxiety flickering briefly in her eyes. "I heard you were here," Detective Emily said quietly, eyes warm yet watchful. "I wanted to bring Sarah some things she's struggled so much lately." Sarah reached hesitantly for the package, avoiding Emily's gentle gaze. Emily lingered a moment, observing Marcus closely, her expression quietly composed but guarded, as if carefully masking something fragile, vulnerable, yet sharply calculating. Marcus stood slowly, studying Emily with renewed scrutiny. "Did Elizabeth ever disappoint you, Emily? Did you ever wish she was different?" Emily's expression shifted subtly, eyes flickering briefly with something Marcus couldn't quite place. Perhaps sadness, perhaps something colder. "Elizabeth was flawed," she replied gently, voice quiet, yet firm. "But I loved her deeply. Friendship isn't perfect, but it's loyal." As Emily turned softly away, stepping quietly back into the rain, Marcus felt a tightening in his chest, a sharp, undeniable instinct that loyalty so carefully portrayed could also mask something far more chilling. Sarah clutched the package tightly, looking at Marcus with fearful eyes. "Be careful," she whispered urgently. Elizabeth trusted Emily more than anyone, and that, I fear, was her greatest mistake. Marcus stepped back into the rain, heart unsettled, the weight of suspicion shifting once more, inexorably drawn toward Emily's gentle, shadowed loyalty, now more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Twilight darkened the estate grounds as Theo Ellis meticulously trimmed hedges near the veranda. The rain had paused, leaving the air thick with moisture and the pungent scent of damp earth. Theo had watched this place change from vibrant to haunted over decades. Now even the roses seemed weighed down by the past. A sudden movement caught his attention, a quiet figure slipping silently toward the edge of the lake. He squinted, heart quickening, as he recognized Emily Mitchell, wrapped in a long coat, walking swiftly with purpose. Curiosity stirred Theo, quietly set down his tools and followed his footsteps, muffled by soft, wet grass. He paused behind an ancient oak hidden in shadow as Emily halted abruptly at the lake's edge. She glanced around carefully, eyes wary, before pulling something small and metallic from her coat pocket, the mud-caked brooch Marcus had briefly held in his hand earlier. Emily stared at it for a long moment, fingers tightening sharply before, with a sudden fierce motion, she hurled it into the dark water. It disappeared with barely a ripple. Theo's breath quickened, his pulse hammering sharply. Emily lingered at the shore posture, rigid hands trembling slightly now that the brooch was gone. Then, with swift, deliberate steps, she returned to the estate, leaving silence and questions in her wake. Theo emerged cautiously from the shadows, mind racing. He understood enough to realize what he'd just seen was significant, dangerous even. His thoughts shifted immediately to Marcus, knowing the detective needed this missing piece, a final truth buried beneath gentle eyes and quiet smiles. Marcus Reed arrived swiftly, the urgency clear in his eyes as Theo recounted the incident. They stood together by the dark water's edge, gazing into its depths. She threw it away deliberately. Theo murmured, voice heavy. "Emily's been here all along, quiet, loyal, yet always watching." Marcus nodded slowly, eyes darkening with certainty. "She was hiding it from us. She knew exactly what that brooch meant. Emily's calmness, her careful presence, it was always more dangerous than rage." He turned to Theo, expression grave, yet resolved. Elizabeth's diary mentioned Emily rarely, but always subtly, never anger, only doubt. Emily played everyone perfectly, guiding suspicion toward louder threats, masking her own quiet betrayal. Theo felt a profound sadness settle deep within him, the truth piercing his heart painfully. Elizabeth trusted her most. Marcus's voice softened, yet remained chillingly clear. Betrayal comes easiest from those closest. Theo stared silently at the lake haunted by echoes of the past. Marcus returned to the estate, swiftly determined steps crunching across gravel, now fully understanding the quiet horror woven through years of careful, unseen manipulations. As Marcus approached the house, Emily stood quietly by an upper window, silhouetted faintly against soft lamplight. Her serene expression never faltered, but beneath the gentle calmness lay a quiet heart exposed, no longer hidden beneath loyalty, but dangerous and raw, waiting silently for the reckoning to come. Marcus Reed sat alone in his makeshift office at the Carter estate. Elizabeth's diary, fragments spread carefully before him, their words echoing endlessly in his mind. Shadows from a single desk lamp danced upon the walls, casting distorted shapes that mirrored Marcus's own troubled thoughts. The truth now felt tantalizingly close, yet brutally elusive. He replayed the last weeks meticulously, every conversation, every subtle glance, every whispered doubt. Slowly, painfully, a pattern emerged. Sarah's jealousy, Vivian's rage, Paul's obsessive fixation, all loud, all visible. Yet Emily had drifted quietly, almost invisibly at the edges of every moment. Marcus had overlooked her gentle composure, mistaking quietness for innocence. The fragments whispered hauntingly, echoing Elizabeth's words. Emily always knows what I need before I do. Sometimes it's comforting, other times unsettling. How much of myself have I shared unknowingly? Marcus stood sharply, realization crystallizing like shards of broken glass. Emily had gently guided suspicion toward others as Sarah's envy, Vivian's wrath, Paul's madness. Emily had hidden her resentment beneath loyalty, her malice beneath gentle kindness, orchestrating events from within Elizabeth's closest circle. The muddy brooch thrown deliberately into the lake was not panic, it was a final calculated step to bury evidence deeper beneath still waters. A soft knock interrupted Marcus's revelation. Emily stood at the door, face calm posture, perfectly composed eyes, quietly alert. "Detective," she said softly, "is everything all right?" Marcus stared steadily, voice quiet, but edged with tension. "You've been here the entire time," Emily, watching, comforting, guiding suspicion. "Elizabeth never suspected you, not fully, but she should have." Emily's gentle expression remained unchanged, but her eyes hardened subtly. "Elizabeth trusted easily?" she murmured softly. "She misunderstood loyalty." "You used her trust to manipulate everyone," Marcus continued, voice steady, relentless. "Vivian, Sarah, Paul, all of them noisy distractions. But you always remained quiet, unseen." Emily took a slow step forward, her serenity finally cracking into quiet defiance. "Elizabeth took everything without even knowing it," she whispered bitterly. "She overshadowed my life, my dreams, my love. She was blind to anyone else's pain." Marcus's gaze sharpened, voice lowering dangerously. "And the night she vanished, was that your final attempt to reclaim what you felt was yours?" Emily's eyes flashed a momentary glimpse of ice beneath still water. "Elizabeth belonged to no one, not even herself. I simply released her from that prison. It was a mercy." Marcus watched quietly, disgust mingling with quiet sorrow. "You bound her with chains, sank her memory beneath the water, and nearly succeeded in erasing your crime." Emily smiled, faintly, chillingly composed once more. "No one saw clearly, detective. They never do." As Marcus moved silently toward her, he saw in Emily's reflection on the darkened window behind her the fractured image of what had always been there. A quiet monster hidden carefully behind gentle smiles, now finally unmasked. Outside, Theo Ellis stood silently beneath the veranda, listening to every damning word, his heart aching deeply, knowing that quiet betrayals cut deepest hidden reflections far more dangerous than the visible threats the world so easily feared. The Carter estate lay wrapped in darkness as Marcus Reed quietly escorted Emily Mitchell into the grand ballroom, empty now, save for memories. Moonlight spilled weakly through tall windows, illuminating chandeliers draped in cobwebs, silk curtains faded by years of neglect. The silence held an almost tangible weight, thick with ghosts of laughter and betrayal alike. Emily moved calmly, hands Unbound shoulders squared with quiet dignity, eyes never wavering from Marcus's face. Her gentle composure felt unsettlingly intact even now as truths unraveled around her. "Tell me exactly how it happened," Marcus said softly, voice measured and coldly detached. "You owe Elizabeth that much." Emily tilted her head slightly, moonlight brushing her calm features with a quiet silver glow. "Elizabeth asked me to walk with her," she began, voice steady, almost comforting. She was upset, vulnerable, tired of the demands Vivian placed on her, exhausted by Sarah's endless envy, frightened of Paul's silent obsession. Marcus's eyes sharpened. "Yet you chose to betray her trust." Emily's gaze softened, oddly, eyes distant with memory. "Friendship isn't simple, detective. It's tangled, messy, dark. Elizabeth took things without knowing my dreams, my place, even William's quiet affection. She lived carelessly, assuming everyone's love was unconditional. I wanted her to understand my pain." Marcus stepped closer, voice lowering dangerously. "So you confronted her at the lake, and when she resisted, you silenced her." Emily's calmness cracked subtly, voice quivering with suppressed emotion. "She laughed, dismissed me as if my suffering meant nothing. In that moment, she confirmed what I always knew: I was invisible beside her." Her gaze darkened, suddenly bitterness seeping through her gentle facade. "She made me nothing, detective." Marcus studied her carefully, expression quietly unyielding. "You chained her to erase her, completely hiding your crime behind years of quiet loyalty." Emily nodded slowly, her voice dropping to a whisper edged with remorse and lingering malice. "It was never about anger, detective. It was justice, quiet, personal justice." Marcus reached into his coat pocket, retrieving the muddy brooch Theo had recovered from the lake earlier, still stained but unmistakable. Emily's breath caught softly, her calmness finally fracturing visibly, a flicker of pain briefly crossing her face. "Elizabeth gave you this as a symbol of trust," Marcus said quietly. "You threw it away, hoping to bury the last evidence of your betrayal." Emily stared silently at the brooch, voice barely audible. "It was the only thing left that still bound us, the only reminder of what I'd become." Marcus regarded her coldly, pity and disgust mingling quietly within him. "You misunderstood loyalty, Emily. It doesn't demand repayment. It exists despite pain, despite disappointment." Outside, headlights flashed softly, police cars pulling quietly onto the gravel driveway. Emily lifted her head defiantly, calmness, restored eyes reflecting moonlight once more eerily serene. "You'll never truly understand, detective," she murmured softly, gaze distant yet hauntingly clear. "Elizabeth and I were bound by more than friendship. We shared secrets, weaknesses, darkness. We were reflections trapped together. I simply shattered the mirror." As officers entered silently, gently guiding Emily away, Marcus stood alone, moonlight pooling quietly around him. The veil of betrayal lifted now, the truth painfully stark. Beneath quiet loyalty transformed into chilling malice. Friendship corrupted irrevocably, trust shattered silently beneath calm waters. In the days following Emily Mitchell's arrest, the Carter estate gradually settled into an uneasy calm. Media vans departed, leaving behind crushed grass and tire tracks, the scars of curiosity. Soon the place was empty again, silent but for the whispers of wind rustling through ancient trees. William Reynolds stood alone at the lake's edge, Elizabeth's torn wedding dress draped gently across his trembling arms. The lace, now clean but irrevocably stained with memory, felt impossibly heavy, weighted with grief and revelation alike. He gazed at the water, dark and still, once a silent keeper of secrets, now exposed and vulnerable beneath a cold, indifferent sky. Theo Ellis approached quietly, his boots crunching softly across the gravel. He carried a bundle of fresh lilies, their petals vivid white against the muted tones of the surrounding landscape. "She always loved lilies," Theo murmured gently, laying the flowers carefully at William's feet. William's eyes brimmed softly, grief etched deeply into his face. "All these years," he whispered, voice fractured with pain. "Emily stood beside us, comforted us, deceived us." Theo nodded gently, gaze distant. "We rarely see betrayal clearly," he replied softly. "It hides behind faces we trust most." William exhaled shakily, tears slipping quietly down his face. Elizabeth trusted her completely. He whispered, regret heavy in his voice. We all did. Theo placed a steadying hand gently on William's shoulder. She wanted us to see the loud threats, not the quiet ones. Evil's quietest form is often the hardest to recognize. William nodded slowly, fingers gripping the lace more tightly. How do we move on from something like this? Theo looked out across the lake, eyes softened with years of quiet wisdom. One day at a time, he murmured quietly. We rebuild, we plant, again we heal. Across the grounds, Detective Marcus Reed closed his notebook, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of closure mixed with lingering sadness. The fragments had finally come together, revealing truths painfully buried beneath loyalty and love, distorted into darkness. As Marcus walked toward his car, ready to leave the estate behind at last, William stood silently holding the dress that symbolized lost innocence and bitter lessons. He glanced one last time toward the lake, the place where trust had shattered and truths were painfully resurrected. Theo gently touched William's arm, drawing him from his grief. Evil might hide behind familiar faces, he whispered softly, voice comforting, but kindness endures. William swallowed hard, looking into Theo's steady gaze. I'm afraid, he admitted quietly, afraid to trust again. Theo squeezed William's shoulder gently, eyes calm and reassuring. Trust comes slowly, but it returns. Elizabeth would want you to remember that. William smiled faintly, a fragile hope emerging amidst grief. You're right, he whispered, voice steadier now. She would. As they stepped away from the lake, leaving the past resting quietly beneath the surface, William felt Theo's quiet strength beside him, guiding him forward gently. In the end, that was the lesson. Evil might hide behind familiar faces, but true loyalty, quiet kindness, and the courage to heal endures. As they moved toward their new future, William squeezed Theo's hand gently. I'm still afraid, William whispered softly, uncertainty lingering. Theo's calm voice reassured him quietly. That's all right. We'll face it together. They stepped toward healing, toward a future they would build one day at a time.
Thank you for listening to Brody's Stories. Until we meet again.